Hey there, special educators. Welcome to Autism Academy 360, a podcast to making your job as special education teachers easier. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Abby, a behavior specialist. And together, we have over 25 years of special education experience.
And I'm a veteran autism teacher. We both are passionate about empowering you with practical teaching strategies and actionable tips and tricks that will help you thrive in your role.
Whether you're a seasoned educator looking for fresh insights, a newbie navigating your first classroom, or a parent of a neurodivergent child, this podcast is your go-to resource for all things autism.
So let's get started with today's episode.
Hey, it's Abby, and we're going to talk today about something that I hear all the time. They just don't want to work for anything. Reinforcement doesn't work. Maybe you've tried every sticker, every toy, every reward you can possibly think of, but it's just not clicking. If this sounds like you, we're going to dive into that today. We're also going to talk a little bit about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So that will definitely come into play because that is a hot topic in the world of special ed. So let's talk first about reinforcement. Reinforcement is anything that's going to happen after a behavior to make it more likely to happen in the future. Now, it can be different from kid to kid. Lots of kids like praise and stickers, but also a lot of kids like something totally different. And we're going to get into that as well. Now, you also have to think that some kids don't want those tangible items of a sticker or a toy. They want to escape the task. They want to get teacher attention. We just have to give that reinforcement in a more appropriate way, or they get it in a more appropriate way. So if you are doing a reinforcement schedule, say with a token board, and it's not working, here are some of the things that you can troubleshoot. 1, maybe you need a faster schedule of reinforcement. What does that mean? We're not going to dive too much into schedules of reinforcement, but it's really important to keep in mind. You might need to reinforce that student sooner and more often than you think. Initially, you might have to reinforce that behavior every single time. For example, they do one math problem, they get a couple minutes to play with their blocks. That is a lot. That's a lot to manage. I'm not saying that that's for everyone, but you might have to start there. A lot of times I see kids that they can earn their reward at the middle of the day and at the end of the day. Sometimes not till the end of the day. That is way too long for some students, and they can't hold together and be motivated by that. So sometimes you have to have a stronger schedule of reinforcement or a faster schedule of reinforcement. Now, something else that might be happening is the magnitude of reinforcement doesn't match the necessary effort they have to put out. So if you think of it this way, you were asked to go chaperone a dance. And they told you this last minute and they're like, oh, but don't worry. We are going to pay you $10. Now it's a Friday night. This isn't the last thing you want to be doing. $10 is most likely not going to motivate you enough to get yourself there, right? But if they were like, oh, we're going to offer you $1,000, I would be there early, right? So you have to make sure that the magnitude of that reinforcement matches the effort needed. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be just like this bigger reward. It could be that, right? But it could be longer access. So maybe they get 15 minutes to color as opposed to just 5. It could be, again, that more frequent reinforcement, or you can add some little pizzazz to it. So maybe they go and they get to go color somewhere. Maybe they get to bring a friend. These can increase that magnitude to make the effort that's being put out match the reinforcement. Now, something that's really important to troubleshoot is thinking that the behavior might not be in the student's repertoire. I see this happen all the time. They think the kids have it, or they assume the kids have it, or they've displayed it once or twice. Now, maybe they can show it every so often, but you have to really make sure that the kids have this, and this is a skill that you are asking of them that they can do with fairly easily, right? So what you could do is you can use task analysis. All a task analysis is sounds kind of scary. It's really not. Is you take some steps and you break them down into smaller teachable steps. So say, for example, you're saying to your student, well, let's get outside. If you get outside in less than 5 minutes, you get to play outside for 5 extra minutes. But they don't have all of the skills to be able to get ready to go outside. They can't zip their jacket. They can't put on their boots. This is a pretty easy one that you could see if they could do this or not, but it's really easy to understand. Doesn't matter how much motivation I have. If I can't zipper up my zipper, I'm not going to be able to get out there and play and access my reinforcer. Someone could offer me $1,000,000 right now, and I could not run a marathon. I just couldn't. I could give it all my best effort. I could try my hardest. I could really want to do it, but I just don't have the skills in my repertoire right now. So if this is a student like yours, maybe they are unable to sit for 10 minutes, but they can sit for 1 minute. So you can break that down. What are they able to do? They can do it for 1 minute. Okay, great. We're going to start reinforcing them there. We're going to teach them, how can we build upon these skills? So they start to maybe need a movement at 1.5 minutes. How can they get that and be able to stay with the lesson? Can they ask for a break? Can they walk in the back of the room? Maybe they don't even sit. Maybe they stand. Things like this that you need to be thinking of and also explicitly teaching. Now, reinforcers are something that we also need to talk about in and of themselves. Something that is a reinforcer might not be motivating in that moment that you're asking. What happens is students can become possibly satiated, which means they've gotten that reinforcer too much. So if you're doing it a lot, you're doing a great job, but all of a sudden it just stops working. Heard that before. It just stopped working out of the blue. They're not interested in it anymore. If you think of it like this, say you are drinking a lot of water, you're so good at hydrating throughout the day that when someone offers you a drink, you can pass, right? It's like, okay, like I have enough. Thank you. I'm good. But say you have not had a sip of water all day, you are going to be dying for that water. It is going to be so much more reinforcing. If someone asks you to do something to get that water, you are much more likely to do it. Obviously, we would not do that with students. They should always have access to water. It's just showing you that this is how our behavior works, right? Behavior is lawful. If you are struggling, you say, oh, my students love this, but they are not willing to work for it. That happens. There are some things that your students might love. They might want to play with it every day at recess, but a preference is going to be different than a reinforcer. Remember, a reinforcer is something that is going to change the behavior for the future. So it's okay. You might get it wrong, and you always are evaluating and reflecting on it. But I do suggest to do a preference assessment. There are lots of different ways to do a preference assessment. I'm going to leave a link of my preference assessment, and it has the directions in there how to give it, all the data sheets, so you really can easily do it in your classroom. There are ones where you can send home to parents or ask the students, but there's also ones that you can be a little bit more data driven with as well. Now, what else you have to do is make sure that the reinforcement delivery is being consistent. So if you have a token board, you need to make sure that the schedule is being followed by whoever is implementing it. You don't want maybe in the morning it to be, every hour they're earning that reward, and then in the afternoon, every 15 minutes. That's really confusing for the student, and it's going to make the plan ineffective. So you really need to make sure that it is being used with consistency. You also have to make sure that as soon as a student earns the reward from the token board, they get access to it. I sometimes see staff say, you earned your last token, but let's just finish up this worksheet. That is not going to help students buy into the plan. We need to make it so that when they earn that token, that last reinforcement of their token board, they get access to their backup reinforcer, that thing that they are actually working for. Now let's talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. There are a few arguments that I have when people say, we just want to use intrinsic motivation. Hey, me too. I want everyone to be intrinsically motivated. That would make life easier, right? Kids would be doing so great if they were intrinsically motivated. But the reality is they're not there yet. Notice I said yet. I want all students to eventually be intrinsically motivated. How do they get there? A few ways. First off, they might need to come into contact with those feelings, that intrinsic motivation feelings, right? Because students who are intrinsically motivated still have some sort of reinforcement. It might just not be that external tangible reward, which is what people typically say is the extrinsic motivation. So when students are, engaging in a lot of these behaviors, they might not be able to see how if they engage in different behavior, they would still come in contact with different reinforcement. They might need to see how it feels to get praise before they're able to start changing their behavior for the long term. How do they do that? They need to be motivated by possibly an extrinsic motivator, right? Something else you can do to always focus on is if you're using a token board, you want to always be focusing on generalizing and extending that. So say your student is earning the backup reinforcer, so all of their tokens every half hour. What is the plan to move it forward from a half hour to 45 minutes? Are you going to extend the time between each token? Are you going to add more tokens to the board? Having that awareness is really going to help you make sure that the students are intrinsically motivated. You always need to make sure that you are also talking about it. Like, doesn't it feel good when you are able to keep your body safe and not hurt your friends? Making sure that they can identify that, yeah, it does feel good. So those are the ways that I'm always making sure that I'm moving my students towards being intrinsically motivated because, yes, that is our goal. They're not going to have someone next to them their whole lives with a token board. And of course, I also want to say that if you are using a token economy, you don't want to just use it for compliance. This is not what we want to do. We need to listen to the autistic community when they're saying that they are so compliance-based. So we don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you are allowing the student to have autonomy in it. And as much as possible, get them to buy into it, build it with you, get their feedback as much as you are able to. All right, that is a wrap up of this week about what to do when reinforcers aren't working. Some troubleshooting things of talking about, is it truly a reinforcer? Making sure that you remember that it might not just be a tangible item that they want. Talking about a faster schedule of reinforcement. Talking about matching the reinforcement to the effort that they have to put out. We also talked about how the behavior might not be in their repertoire yet. We talked about how preference is different than actual reinforcers. And finally, we touched upon extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Now, I have to be honest, this is not an end-all be-all about why reinforcers sometimes aren't working. This is just a place for you to start so you can troubleshoot it in your own classroom. If you have any questions for me why it's not working in your classroom, send me a DM, Mrs. Mo's Modifications, and we can troubleshoot it together. And if you want, you can get the preference assessments down in the show notes. And that's all for this one. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Autism Academy 360. We hope that you've gained some tips and motivation to fuel your week ahead.
Before you go, don't forget to hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you want to show support, head to Apple Podcasts and leave your rating and review.
Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and most importantly, stay connected. We'll catch you in the next episode.